Hello everybody and welcome back to 3+1 Media. We talk about people, politics, and pop culture, and today in politics we are talking about the verdict of Donald John Trump, the former president of these United States of America, America's 45th president, has been found guilty on 34 counts in a scheme to illegally influence the 2016 election by paying hush money to former porn star Stormy Daniels. This is a historic moment for our country and for all of America. The focus of this video is on what does this verdict mean specifically to Black Americans and to Black voters as we approach the 2024 election. Now, the media would have you believe that there's this barrage of Black voters switching over to the Republican Party to vote for Donald Trump, but evidence says that's not so. I live in the state of Georgia, and many people want to talk about the polls, but polls don't vote, people do. And this is a piece of content that I made on the Clock app that talks about what's really likely to happen in November. I'm going to start there. Take a look at this. Mainstream media would have you think Black people are leaving the Democratic Party in record numbers, according to their carefully sourced polls. But like my friend Two Real always says, polls don't vote, people do. And the Georgia presidential primary results paint a very different picture of Georgia's Black electorate. 95% of all Black voters in Georgia cast a Democratic ballot during the Georgia presidential primary, which is in line with how Black voters have always turned out in this state. And it is not in keeping with the claims made by mainstream media or by former President Donald Trump. Literal polls from mainstream media sources like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and the New York Times suggested that a whopping 20% of Black voters would vote Republican so they could cast a vote for Trump. Commentary all over social media waxed poetically about the great migration of Black voters, this great migration of Black voters to the Republican Party that just didn't happen. Termination of media to portray Black support for Trump is a laughable failure, but it is clear that they are committed to seeing this through in hopes of making their dreams a reality. And I can give you a clear example of exactly what I mean when I say this. When former President Donald Trump visited Chick-fil-A in Atlanta's historic West End, Atlanta's historic West End that's home to Morehouse and Spelman, going out of his way to be seen with Black people while headed to a fundraiser in Buckhead where a lot of non-Black people would be, every single media source ran the article highlighting his Black support, although that support was fraudulent, although they were paid actors sent there by the Trump campaign and the Republican Party of Georgia and God knows who else. But when Vice President Kamala Harris came to town, almost no mention of her economic opportunity tour or the large crowds of real Black people who came out to support her and the progress of the Biden administration. And so with that being said, I cannot deny that a number of Black voters and young voters are unhappy with President Biden's stance on the Middle East. Genocide happening in Gaza is a real issue that many Black Americans are taking personally. And yeah, I do believe that's impacting President Biden's standing in the Black community. But to think that they are now going to switch over and vote for Trump is, I think, very, very misleading, especially now with these 34 guilty counts that have been ruled. Donald Trump is going to be sentenced on July the 11th, and he, of course, did not take the news well. He immediately began to continue the effort to portray this as an unfair verdict. This was Donald Trump after he left the courtroom and after he received Judge Merchan's verdict.
This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for convicted felons?
Are you going to drop out?
While Donald Trump was absolutely wrong about President Biden having a say or influencing this verdict or this entire court case, because he didn't. He could have tried this in federal court. They offered this first to the Department of Justice and to Attorney General Merrick Garland, who declined to press charges. This was done in state court with a totally different set of penalties and a totally different appeal process. So while he was wrong about that, he was right about one thing that he did say in that video. And it's the fact that the American people will ultimately be responsible for deciding the role that his guilt plays on November the 5th. Something that we're all looking forward to. And then again, some of you are still deciding, I'm sure many of you are still deciding what will be your role. And if you're black, you're probably deciding whether or not you're going to vote for Biden or if you're going to stay home. Because honestly, I can't imagine that voting for Donald Trump is an option for the majority of you who are watching this program. Many people have wondered, will Donald Trump actually face jail time? And I'm going to go on the record and say, I don't think so. These are Class E felonies, Class E convictions. I don't think he's going to face jail time. And I don't even know if I care whether or not he does. Personally, I don't care. I don't care if Donald Trump goes to jail for these charges. What matters to me is that justice was blind and the rule of the law was applied fairly to this man, regardless of who he is or what he has done in his life or for this country. Donald Trump committed a crime, 34 of them, in regards to what he did in 2016 with Stormy Daniels and hush money in an effort to deceive the American people as he attempted to run for president. And tonight, he was found guilty. And tonight, he is going to deal with the consequences of his actions and the punishment that will come on July the 11th. Now, whether or not he goes to jail for those crimes, I don't care. The guilty verdict for me as a human being, as an American citizen, is more than enough. It gives me a new sense of faith in the American judicial process. It's not only in the American judicial process, but in the rule, in the universal law that governs all, in karma. I am old enough to remember the Central Park Five. 5 black boys who were accused of a brutal assault on a jogger in Central Park in New York State. And I remember how Donald John Trump came out then as a failed businessman pretending to be successful and said that these young men deserved the death penalty, although they were not even guilty of the crime. This man put out a full-page spread in the New York Times that was seen all around the world, calling for their conviction, calling for their sentencing, and calling for them to get a death conviction. And I believe firmly in my heart that a number of things contributed to those 5 boys getting a life sentence, being found guilty. And of all those things, I believe that that ad had an impact on the people in the city of New York who ultimately sat on that jury and found them guilty. Here we are now in 2018. Those boys were found to be innocent. They were finally exonerated by DNA evidence. And Donald John Trump, then as president of these United States, as president of all people in this country, as president of those boys, as president of black people living here, doubled down on the fact that he was not wrong and he does not apologize for what he did when those young men were first arrested, despite the fact they were exonerated by DNA evidence. To me, this is karma for that. A piece of evidence around this being karma is that today is the day that President Joseph Robinette Biden's son, Beau Biden, transitioned from this earth into everlasting life. And on that day, on the day that this man lost his son, one of the most tragic, saddest days of his life, he now sees his political opponent, a man who has talked about him and about his dead son, receiving a verdict at the hands of the American justice system. To me, it all rings of karma. So personally, I don't need to see him go to jail. This man's judge, jury, executioner. But I know that's what many people are asking and caring about. I don't think he'll go to jail, but he might. CNN had some commentary on this issue, and so I'm going to now kind of show a piece of that for you now.
Obviously, Donald Trump, former President Trump, and his legal team are going to appeal. And we've discussed already the grounds for appeal and the arguments that he might bring up for appeal, and there are many. Beyond that, though, he can't appeal until the sentencing, right? And how is that decision made? Does Judge Merchan just go to his chambers and emerge like Moses with tablets, or are there arguments that are going to be made by Donald Trump's attorneys, by the prosecutors?
There will be intensive investigation and arguments between now and July 11th.
Public ones?
Yeah, we will get public filings where the DA will ask the judge to impose whatever sentence they think is appropriate. Donald Trump's team will put in their request, certainly, for a non-incarceratory, a non-prison sentence. And let me address the question that I imagine is on a lot of people's minds, which is how likely is it that Judge Merchan imposes a sentence of prison? Now, this is a Class E felony. In New York State, you have Class A is the most serious felony. If we look at the universe of Class E convictions in New York State, and several good researchers out there have done sort of surveys over the last year or so, generally the estimates are that somewhere between 70 and 90% of Class E New York convictions result in non-prison sentences. So that would be some combination of probation, fines, perhaps community service. But the converse of that, 10 to 30-ish% do result in prison time. And this will be entirely up to Judge Merchan.
Is there a difference? Are the 10 to 30% that are sentenced to prison for Class E felonies individuals with worse lawyers? Are there individuals with previous criminal records, like Dana said? I mean, is there any sort of delineation?
So I'll give you what the relevant factors usually would be in a case like this. First of all, how big was the offense? How major was the offense? It's a big difference to steal $5 million versus $100,000. Was this person a first-time offender, or are they on their second, third, fourth conviction? Yeah, the quality of lawyering can absolutely play into it, but this is the most difficult thing that judges do. I mean, you talk to any judge, they will tell you the hardest part of their job is imposing a sentence. And one other thing I just want to make very clear. If Donald Trump does get a prison sentence imposed on him on July 11th, odds are very, very high he will not have to start serving that sentence right away, because in a case like this, he's very likely to get what we call bail pending appeal, meaning he will almost certainly not have to begin serving any sentence until after all of his appeals are done. That would certainly take us out past the election.
So in November, he could be out on bail?
Yes, he will, in all likelihood, in November, he will have been sentenced in July, and the sentence will not actually be imposed until his appeals are done, which will take us well into 2025.
So the appeal process, just to be clear here, so the appeal process, which will kick in the very moment after sentencing, right? I mean, the Trump legal team already has those briefs ready to go. They're going to appeal every single one, every single avenue they can, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, I would imagine. That will take months and months, if not years.
Potentially. So Donald Trump has one appeal as of right to the mid-level New York court, the Court of Appeals for New York, which is the middle level. If he loses there, he can ask the top court in the state of New York, which is actually called the Court of Appeals. The nomenclature gets confusing. He can ask them to take the case. They don't have to, though. It's the same as our U.S. Supreme Court. They can take it if they want to. They don't have to. And then from there, he can try to get it up.
Ultimately, it's in the hands of the judge, but I think we are unlikely to see any of this be concluded before November the 5th. That is when we're going to, and that's when Americans are ultimately going to decide the true fate of Donald John Trump. I think on that day, Americans are going to decide the fate of our country as a whole. I think that the MAGA movement very well could come to its final end on that day. I'm not saying that what they stand for will come to an end. I think it's going to become its next iteration. But the MAGA moment can truly end on November the 5th with the defeat of Donald John Trump if he is not reelected to be president of these United States of America. Many people have given great commentary about what tonight means. Rachel Maddow did an excellent job at her MSNBC roundtable summarizing the meaning behind the moment. So I want you to take a look at this.
It was rigged before the verdict ever came in. These are all the same lines that he's been using all before the jury was picked. The whole he said that the 2020 election was rigged before he competed in the 2020 election. He said the 2016 election was rigged before he competed in that election. This is a thing that he says he's just the same person. Nothing about this is going to change him. But he and his supporters are trying to change us as a country by delegitimizing the legal system of the United States of America because it has found Donald Trump guilty, because the legal system indicted him, because he was put on trial, because he's now been found guilty. They have been using that as their excuse to try to not just upend the American legal system, but to get rid of it, to make Americans believe that it shouldn't be followed. And so the test here, yes, individual tests abound. This jury process was a test. The appellate process will be a test. The sentencing process is an adversarial process, and that itself will be a test. But the test for us as a country starts right now. Does the United States of America have a legal system that is binding on all citizens? Do we accept it? Do we protect the people who enact it? There are human beings at every step of this process who are flesh and blood and who have family members and who are susceptible to threat and injury. Do we protect them? Do we protect Fonnie Willis? Do we protect Tish James? Do we protect Alvin Bragg? Do we protect this judge and his family? Do we protect the jurors? Do we protect the witnesses? Do we protect Jack Smith? Do we protect Judge Cannon? Do we protect Judge Chutkan? Do we make sure that the people who are in charge of enacting this on our behalf as citizens and on Donald Trump's behalf as a citizen, do we make sure that they can do this work both without fear or favor and without threat? And we are failed on that so far. We need to step up our protection of the human beings in this process to...
There are those who say that what happened to Donald Trump isn't fair. Not many of us who are black, but there are those out there who are saying it. And, you know, when you look at the makeup of what happened with this jury, I don't know how you can say that. It's not as though the judge that Donald Trump continuously misaligned verbally in the media, the judge whose daughter he's attacked, the judge who said that he couldn't be fair because he is of Colombian descent. It's not that judge who came to this verdict. The judge simply presided over the case to ensure that the rule of law was followed in the case. This case was decided by 12 ordinary citizens of New York. Attorneys, teachers, people from all walks of life picked to be on this jury. Every single person on this jury was agreed upon by the prosecution and the defense. And when you look at what data is available about these jurors, you're able to see that there was a survey given to the jurors that talks about where do they receive their news. Juror number 2 said they only get news from 2 sources. Twitter, owned by Elon Musk, and Truth Social, the social media platform owned by Donald Trump. Now, I can imagine that the defense thought that juror number 2 would be their ace in the hole, but the reality is that the level of wrongdoing committed by Donald Trump was so egregious and so blatantly clear that not even juror 2 could deny the fact that Donald John Trump was guilty on all charges in this case. That doesn't speak with certainty to the level of guilt. This man, I don't know what does. And how are black people responding to this? Well, conservative media may want you to think that black people are going to be able to better relate to Donald Trump because now he's a criminal, because they think that many black people are criminals. But that is absolutely untrue and is absolutely racist. The reality is most black people took to social media with jokes and memes and humor, the way that we so often do around celebrations of all things black culture. We took this moment and we made it ours. From including Count Von Count, creating hilarious knock-knock jokes, to bringing back the group chat. Black people celebrated all over social media the guilty verdict of Donald John Trump, as did the majority of Americans who care about democracy and who celebrate the rule of law. What does the verdict of Donald John Trump now being found guilty on 34 counts mean to Black America and to Black voters? It means that justice in this case was fair. that when so often we have lived through situations where justice has not been fair to us based upon the color of our skin in this country, like what happened to the Central Park Five, where their youth was taken away from them, where people like Donald Trump celebrated and encouraged that action to happen against them. Today, right now, justice was served. With that being said, I want to say, as always, I hope that you will be blessed, be well, and whatever you do, keep pushing. I'll see you soon.